This is A Silent War Within, the podcast dedicated to confronting the unseen mental health battles carried by our first responder and healthcare heroes. This show is about real stories, real struggles, and real ways to survive the storm and come out stronger on the other side. For too long, stigma has kept you silent, but this is your space to bravely break that silence, share vital insights, and build a community where your well-being truly comes first, because your service deserves unwavering support.
Welcome, everybody, to A Silent War Within. I have a very special, I say this every week, very special guest with me this week, Miss Kimber Mendoza, who's the founder of Resilience Rewritten, also a 15-year dispatcher. We just had a dispatcher on last week. This was very purposeful that we did this episode directly following a dispatcher, because you heard kind of the real life experience of it. And Kimber also has a lot of real life experience, but also you have a lot of clinical setting experience as well. Isn't that right?
A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. So Kimber, we always like to start off the show, and it's a show that initially was going to be focused on mental health topics. It has kind of morphed into talk about mental health through your experiences, through your story. So let's start there. Kimber, you spent 15 years, like I mentioned, in the emergency communications world. You guys are considered, to me, the first responder. Lots of states don't consider you that way, which is an injustice to you guys. And I always like to talk about the human side of what we do, and the human side that's behind the badge or the patch or the title or the hat that we wear. So who is Kimber Mendoza? Tell us your kind of life story, the human behind the headset. Give me what made you walk onto the floor for the very first time in a comm center. And moreover, at the end, tell me why you said yes to a mental health show.
Oh, man. I think first, I'm a mom. I've got 2 teenagers watching how I show up in hard moments every day. So it's not just the easy ones that they see. And that is the purpose. That is my moral compass, my true north in everything I do. I did not come into this industry polished. I came into it extremely curious, very strong-willed, and honestly pretty set on doing the right thing, even when it was uncomfortable, even when no one was looking. I did not have a childhood where I aimed to be in a communication center working under the umbrella of 911. I moved here from California in 2011, and I worked for a nonprofit that did training for government entities and how they interacted with adults with special needs. Several of the police agencies in my general area had some experiences and encounters with adults with special needs that led them to have a required training. And they chose the company that I worked for at the time to be the trainer. For about 3.5 years, I trained police and military entities on how to interact with an adult with a disability. Just because you say drop the gun doesn't mean that's how they interpret drop the gun. We may have to change our language. In all that interaction, I was working for a nonprofit that didn't have great insurance, and my son was a chronically ill kid. I live in Arizona. They typically don't diagnose kiddos with asthma until 3 years old, and so you don't get to be on a treatment plan until the kiddo is 3. He was obviously under 3, and I was struggling with insurance, and I had a couple different PD assistant chiefs and commanders approach me and say, well, why don't you come work for us? I loved the idea. I thought it was great. It sounded like I could work night shift, be with my kids more often. I didn't have to miss out on particular time with them. And so I started applying to selective PD agencies. And I was hired by the only one that I didn't train, which I thought was great, because if I messed up, nobody was going to know who I was. I didn't have a track record with them. And that was the beginning of my experience in 911. I stepped foot in, and my dad had always told us kids that if you do something that you would do for free, you'll really never work. And I've always grasped onto that. I will forever and always be kind and considerate and help someone when I can. And that really is the true essence of any public servant. Communications included. I never left our building not feeling like I didn't contribute to something bigger and assist someone in any capacity. So that was really filling my cup the entire time that I worked for my agency. I think I said yes to this conversation because this work actually deserves honesty. There's no surface level answers, right? Everyone comes from a different story, a different path, but we're all working towards the same goal. And sometimes we blur that because you're fire, I'm PD, or you're medical and I'm air traffic control. We forget that we're all working towards the same common goal and supporting somebody else. And so for me, that's important that we're constantly reminded that just because you may have had this tragic or hardship or challenging experience doesn't mean that you are better or worse than I am. And that we can always come back to our controllables and logical thinking that can ground us and help us to continue to work and make progressive effort in this industry. That's that in a nutshell. Are you still there?
I do this literally all the time. I'll mute myself
I
and then
love it.
forget I'm muted.
It's my favorite because
Constantly guests are like, "Hey, I can't hear you." And I'm like, "God, well, that's the part I'm gonna have to edit out." But I do it all the time. And typically I leave them in because I do get listeners that will write in and say, "You're hilarious at your results and your recording and your technical background," which I have none. I was a paramedic or EMT for the last 20 years. But I think that was a excellent segment there. God, you're already just filling me with so much hope for the rest of this. So I was saying when I was on mute that one of the things that I wanted to tell our listeners is, and I don't know if this is a secret or not, it's not going to be after I say it. Kimber's never done a podcast. So this is her very first podcast. And just based off that answer, you could not tell it. And to everybody else watching this on either Spotify or YouTube, if you see me keep weirdly looking up like this, I got a new monitor set up on my desk. So it's that Kimber is on my screen up here. So if I look really weird and like I have something wrong with my eyes, it's not that. So one of the things I think is interesting that you talk about is this term conditional development, this pattern and frustration of kind of the denied growth. You said in your career that you saw a consistent pattern where performance was required, but development was conditional. So for the dispatcher paramedic that's kind of going through this, first off, why does this frustrate you so much? I guess is the bigger question. What about this frustrates you? And what do you have to say to people who may be experiencing this as well?
oh man, you know, anyone who takes any of my courses, they've come across this in some capacity, right? And so I repeat this phrase constantly. When performance is required, but development's conditional, you create this quiet frustration, almost like a steam pot. Your people stop asking any questions, they stop pushing, and eventually they stop caring the same way. So a lot of the times who applied for that training on Monday, when they're denied by Friday, you're dealing with two very different employees. And imagine that happening over and over and over again. I genuinely think in our industry, because investing in people actually means something, that's where we start to see burnout actually develop.
Sure. I think I would agree with that for sure. And I think throughout my career, I can definitely think of times when this has happened to me. And from a leadership standpoint, that's one of the things that I'm not going to say that it's taught, but I think that that's one of the things that was kind of expected upon entering leadership, that you're kind of the top dog and you kind of treat everybody else that way. And I found it to be very frustrating that there was no focus on development. And one of the things that I absolutely love that I think I have mentioned that Simon Sinek says very often, I've read every one of his books. He's one of my favorite authors. It's not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those who are in your charge. And I think that really speaks volumes about a leader when they adopt that mentality of my job is to make sure these people don't just survive, but they thrive. So I think that's really important. But you worked in centers all across, lots of experience on that call center side of it, that dispatch side of it. that you kind of talked about, but I think especially in those areas, coming from kind of at least a little bit of a dispatch background like I do, many times leaderships will put priority on butts and seats versus the human that's behind the headset. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think no one intends it to come from that place. So I want to be pretty intentional about saying, I don't think leadership sits down at the table and they say, we just need bodies. We don't need capable people or that we don't care. I think because our industry is so busy, we're actually saving lives. We're actually fielding calls that matters, that we kind of lose sight of the investment portion. So it it is a feeling. I don't know if that perception that we receive that fuels that feeling is actually true. I want to be clear because I had an incredible administration. I don't know that I ever stuck with that thought long term, thinking that all they wanted was butts in a chair. I do think that it's easy to fall back on that when the system that's failing you becomes personal. So, yes, the organization is saying, no, you can't have training. And then you internalize that as it being personal when really it's just we're short staffed. We don't have the funding. We can't afford to have you gone during this major event or time, whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
I do think, over time, if you decide to accept that mindset that there's going to be butts and seats and that's more important than the investment in the person, you become detached. Your errors, they start to increase and it's not because you don't care. It's just no one's paying mind to you. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think you and I could walk into 10 centers and see 10 different quality assurance programs going on.
Absolutely.
None of them are wrong, but which one is actually measurable and what one is doing something with the measurement that they have? How are they
Right.
investing? How are they
Right.
preventing? How are they learning? Um, and that's a challenge in itself. My center was PD, so I didn't get to do a lot of crossover with fire. At one point in time, we were collaborated. For the majority of my career, we were separated. And then as I left, they were collaborating together again, which is great. Except what's important to me may not be important to the fire personnel, or it may not be important to the police personnel. And so we end up becoming this weird middleman. And by time we actually have a cohesive agreement and understanding of how they want things to flow, we get a plot twist. There's a new chief on both
Mm-hmm.
sides and new agendas and new financial goals. So it is incredibly challenging to sit here and say, you can't take that personal because now what I was effective and efficient and has now changed and I have to relearn the system.
Sure.
But I didn't get that training. That just flipped overnight. And when we ignore the human and expect performance to hold, I think we have a huge breakdown in the ultimate goal of supporting our community, because that is why we're there.
Mm-hmm.
Our department doesn't exist because PD needs to have someone tell them where to go and fire needs someone to tell them when there's a fire or a medical emergency. We're there to support the community. We are that first customer service bridge. There was a woman that I worked with for years, and on her way out, she was just giving really profound advice. And one of the things she said is, if you could pay it forward to anyone, just remember, these people call 911 maybe
Mm-hmm.
once, maybe twice in their life. And when they're greeted with you, you're their first contact ever. So if it's a bad experience and it comes back to voting and whether we get something or don't get something, like keep in mind, like we impact this community so much. We're the face of 911, even
That's
without our
right.
face showing. So I've always held on to that. I think it's incredible advice. And I think anyone who's burned out, like that's a great gentle reminder is that you're not typically dealing with the same person over and over again. It's a new person.
Mm. That's
That was a
so
little bit of
good.
a tangent.
No, I love
Sorry.
that. No, I love a good tangent. I am here for it. So all this kind of inspired you to start Resilience Rewritten. So tell us a little bit about what that is, what you guys do, kind of the basis of where this Resilience Rewritten came from.
It really was kind of an overnight decision. I had an
Favorite kind.
incredible yeah, I had an incredible career. I worked with incredible people. I was very fortunate. Like every center, there were ups and downs and different spurts of growth. Towards the tail end, I had promoted as supervisor. I love the job. I love that you can go into that building and never leave like you didn't pour into something greater than you.
Hmm.
I have 2 teenagers, and I had a desire to contribute to this industry without being consumed by this industry. And it's hard. I think we're just now accepting mental health as a thing, which is good.
Oh, yeah.
Don't believe that I've suffered any PTSD. I don't think that I've had any calls that have lingered with me that have reshaped my life. I have had calls that impacted me like everyone. I'm 100% human.
Hmm.
But I wasn't led by that mindset of we need to learn coping skills. I just used rationale. Someone needs to answer the call. I know how to do it. I'll do it. I got it. And if I got a bad call, well, thank goodness it was me because I knew how to do these things. And I know that I couldn't have changed that outcome. So it started with I've worked on graves the majority of my career. So you get a lot of think tank time. And it really just started with, okay, I think I want to do contract work. I think I want to do training. And I want to do it to where anyone working in a 24/7 environment can actually attain that easily. It's
Hmm.
cost effective. It meets you where you are. It's remote. So, you don't have to go and travel. Have so many I don't know what I wanna call APCO and Nina because they're more than just a training resource, but we have these platforms that say, "Hey, we wanna support you, we wanna help you, uh, here's all these resources, but come to this conference, and we'll give you 9 classes in 8 hours,"
Hmm.
which is cool, except they don't talk about what I need to talk about. It's not
Right.
customized to me.
Right.
I'm not dealing with a mean girl mentality, I'm dealing with someone who is just struggling to cope. I'm not dealing with short staffing, I'm dealing with inept abilities, and it's out of my pay range to fix, so how do I feel successful in that environment, you know? It's all different walks of life coming into one room, but it's one person speaking generically to, I'd say anywhere from, like, 50 to 100 people. It's certainly beneficial and it does fill your cup, but is it long lasting? And then when you're a frontline employee and you hear those things, does it get to the right people that need to hear it? And that's kind of where I struggled of like, let me meet people where they're at. Let's talk about what you're actually dealing with. So it's remote by design. It was very intentional. I think accessibility changes everything. And I don't mean that in like a cliche way. I think when development is actually reachable, the no travels, the no approvals, you remove like one of the biggest barriers in any government entity. It also tells your frontline when you can check off on that green check and pay for it and move forward is, hey, you matter enough to invest in, even when things are tight. And that alone just starts to shift the culture that's on the floor.
Mm. Yeah,
And
I like that. So what practical skills are you teaching to help a dispatcher regulate their emotions?
great question, because I think it just depends on who's sitting in front of me. You're going to have people that are just frustrated with things they can't control. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's all of us, right? I can't control traffic and I'm
Absolutely.
getting frustrated on my way to work. I'm short fused, my coffee spilled, and one thing leads into another. But in this industry, we don't control who's calling in. We don't control how they call in. So their demeanor, their screaming, calm, whether we can hear them, can't hear them, whether there's cell phone issues. We don't control the crime. We don't control the people around us. We don't control the radio traffic. We don't control the officers. We don't control the fire personnel. We don't control EMTs. And so a lot of it really is, what can you control around you that keeps you calm and grounded? Our systems go down all the time because technical issues happen, because CrowdStrike is bound to happen at some point, right? We experienced that, and that was like wild, going manual for 8 hours. Those small instances, taking someone and saying, okay, what's in front of you and what can you control? Well, I can't control her attitude. Great. But you can control what you contribute to it. So sometimes it's not how you or what you say, it's how you say it? And so if it's peer issues, we're dissecting that. If it's call issues, we're breaking that through. We're identifying what's in your control, acknowledging what wasn't, and then closing the loop before it turns into something like guilt. I think for high stress calls, that's the difference between processing a call and carrying it. If you don't close the loop, you end up carrying a weight that's not yours to carry. So I I hope that anyone listening to this that has to go through that understands you can absolutely close those things on your own. But if you can't, if you're thinking about it, if it's cycling, if it's impacting your home life, how you show up as a mom, as a spouse, as a sibling, any of those factors, any of those core roles that you hold, it's worth looking into and at least getting some additional assistance and resources. It doesn't mean you're broken. It just means we need a little extra help to close that loop.
That's such a good take on that. And one of the probably best ways I've heard that put we talk about a lot on this show that part of the stigma of anything mental health is that we as responders or dispatchers or whatever your kind of case may be, we feel like there's something wrong with us, that we're broken. So I think using that word in particular is very important in saying that you're not broken. You just have a loop that's still open. You just have something that we need to deal with. And I also think that this took me forever to learn, teaching people that, hey, you can only control so much, focus on those things. It took me so long to just learn that. And I've got a poster over here in my office somewhere that's got, it's a little circle poster. The circle's here and it's got all the things I can control inside the circle, and everything else is all the exterior noise, if you will, that I don't have any control over. I can't control what other people do, but certainly I can focus on the way I contribute to their feelings or the way we handle a situation or things like that. And it took me a long time to kind of figure out that, hey, I might be fueling the fire a little bit here. And some of this I have to take a little bit of personal accountability for and say, yeah, I'm not the cause of the problem, but I'm certainly not making it any better. So I think teaching that skill is something that I think there's such a good market for, especially in those, as you mentioned, the 24/7 places that you just don't learn that right off. I was in EMS for 15 years before I even thought about any of this.
And I think that's the cool part about the culture shift in this industry, right? Like, there's something that I like to tell people: if you did your job well, the outcome doesn't get to rewrite what your effort was. And that's probably one of the most sounding things people need to hear is guilt doesn't always mean that you failed. Sometimes it just means that you showed up and you cared. And there really is no such thing as caring too much, but we do have to remember that in in the field, and it doesn't matter where you're standing as a first responder, your unprocessed calls, they don't disappear. They start to stack and they may show up in the next call. So with an officer, it may look like someone irritable. With EMT or fire, EMS, it may be something like you're just short fused. With the dispatcher or the call taker, it may be the tone in your voice. And so I say closing the loop, but really we have to be able to process that and be able to move forward just as well as if we didn't handle it. And that is what outside entities and, those new people that showed up 10, 15 years ago didn't know. if we can speak volumes to that now, I think it'll help so many be able to create a foundation that's worth standing on and won't fault them as easily as it had, at least for me. I can only speak for myself.
That is good. I mean, you are doing a good thing. You've got some stuff figured out that I wish I would have had figured out years ago. It would
Trial
have
and error.
made yeah, exactly. It would have made life so much easier to have some of this stuff figured out or have somebody like you that came alongside me and said, "Hey, you're not broken, but we certainly have some work to do. So let's work together and figure it out." And I think that really segues really well into this next section, which I'm really excited to talk about because it pertains to me. Hopefully, I learn something from every one of these podcasts. I think that's why I enjoy doing it so much. But certainly, this in the form and the topic here is of leadership, and leadership, from what you say, is very much a behavior and not a rank. And you talk about that how a junior dispatcher, or for my case, a new paramedic, kind of how a leader would exercise their leadership to protect the morale of the team. And even those people coming into that have a part to play in that, kind of boosting that morale and keeping that morale at a good level. So, how, from a leadership standpoint, can we do better? And how can someone coming into the field new be part of the solution versus part of the problem?
Yeah, I want to say this with a spoonful of humble pie because I think this is something that I experienced baptism by fire on, right? Like if you want things to change, you
Me too.
have to set the pace. So leadership is not a behavior, or it is a behavior, it is not a rank. And that is, people will hear that and they'll be like, "Oh, well, I don't have any influence. I don't have any sway in a decision. I can't. I won't. I'm not paid enough. It's not in my wheelhouse." Those are great excuses, but leadership shows up in behavior before it ever shows up in a title. You don't need a rank to stay consistent, which is the number one complaint of frontline people for leaders. Things change too rapidly. Nothing's consistent. You judge them differently than you judge me, or the criteria changes every day, the ends and why. Communication, good leaders communicate well. They're thorough. They don't leave things out. They're clear, they're kind, they're effective, and they actually communicate. I think the running joke in our center, and I'm sure it's centers all across the nation, which is communications just doesn't communicate. The reality is we do really good with our community and we do really well with those that we serve. We just don't we're not great at internal communication for some reason.
Mm.
I think a lot of that is just how many entities we're appeasing to, right? Like we're talking to higher ups, we're talking to the community, we're dealing with radio, we're dealing with phone systems, we're dealing with everybody under the sun. And then when it comes time to communicate a change, we have like been over inundated with so much that we forgot to tell the people that it impacts most.
You're very, very correct. That is a very accurate statement. So, I guess also from a leadership perspective, I'm very interested in this too. How do you uphold high standards and consistent performance without creating this unnecessary strain?
I want to say it is so easy. Anytime we were assigned different teams in my center. And so like you would bid for your shift and depending what shift you got assigned a supervisor. Looking back now, I'm able to reflect and I can't be speak any higher of the people that I worked with because they were amazing. I was clear with my expectations. Here's what I expect. Here's what I need. I don't expect perfection, but I do expect professionalism. So if you make an error, please let me know about it. If you didn't know you made an error and it comes to me, I'm going to do all of the research to try my best to advocate for you. At the very end, if it falls on human error, I just need you to take ownership over it. And in every circumstance, like when I met with someone, I'm not upset. Nothing you do is going to make me infuriated. If you're human and you make an error or you thought something was supposed to go a certain way, there's no amount of fury or frustration that I can express that's going to go back and change that. So my job is just to educate you now. And so there had been times where I, as the supervisor, because I was on the floor and I didn't catch it, took complete ownership over the air.
Hmm.
But then my role now is, hey, we got to do better. And here's the policy or the procedure or what would have been better for us to do in that moment. And it's not just a you thing, it's an us thing because I have to take my piece of the pie there too.
I think that's one of the things that we as leaders, and especially somebody who came, so I transitioned into a leadership position from almost 10 years worth of experience on the team that I was now managing. So it was a whole, people that have known you for 10 years know all your failures, they know all the things. It's a very hard transition. And I think one of the things that I got kind of inundated with at first is that I had this image in my head of what leadership was supposed to look like and what kind of the what we think of as corporate leadership. Like I thought I was supposed to be something that I really wasn't. And for a time there, I'm a very compassionate person. I kind of not necessarily wear my emotions on my sleeve, but definitely right there at the surface. And I'll allow that to shine through. And I had a person that was director level, so I was manager level, directors above me, that just made me feel so inferior to him and other leaders because he didn't believe that the way that I led and kind of having the heartstrings attached to that was the right way to lead. And he made me feel very inferior for doing that. And it wasn't until somebody at the senior director level, obviously being in a hospital system, we have multiple layers of leadership. And it wasn't until somebody at a senior director level pulled me aside and said, "Do you not know why I chose you for this position? It's because you lead with your heart. It's because you care about people. It's because you care about the team that you serve and you want them to not just survive, but thrive." And that was a big phrase that was thrown around throughout my introduction to leadership is the way that I had that true desire within my heart for them to really succeed. And that's not to say that I didn't mess up and that I didn't have problems with this and I didn't cause some of this unnecessary strain and morale issues and communication issues. I've always thought of myself that I'll always be a student of leadership. I don't ever say I'm a leader. That's too period ending sentence for me. I would rather for it to be I'm a student of leadership, comma, and let me fill in the rest of that with whatever I'm learning today or this week or whatever it is. And I've had some times where I've had to learn some tough lessons. And just over the past year and a half almost that I've been doing this, it's been definitely a learning experience. And I think managers and leadership many times miss that fact that it's not a rank, it's a behavior. Are you one who leads from a pedestal or are you one that leads on the ground with your people? And I think leading on the ground with your people is totally different. And it does take what you're referring to in taking some ownership and realizing that all the fury in the world is not going to change what has actually occurred. Really, that's a time for education and talking through thought processes and things like that. So you can get down to the basis of where the error started and how to deal with it. So I think you bring up a very valid point. I'm gaining so much from this, whether we have two listeners that hear this or 100, I'm gaining I'm gaining so much through hearing you talk. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I think something I want to throw out too,
Yeah.
when these errors are egregious, and I'll use this as a made up scenario, but we get it in dispatch a lot in trainings where they'll say, we're human. Someone gives you an address, you may put east instead of west. And so the whole team is headed to, 123 Street, West Street, and they needed to go to the other, vice versa.
Done that.
I think most people have, they just catch it early on. But something to keep in mind is if there's something that's tragically associated with that, talking to that person as if they've done wrong isn't going to help them recover because now you have twofold. You have someone who is carrying the weight of this call and then the weight of the delay for a response. And so approaching that tactfully is important. If it's happening on multiple occasions, I think that's a different scenario, and I
Sure.
don't wanna go too deep into the mud with that, but I do want to let people know who are struggling, they're first-time leaders, they're going into this, and they're just not quite sure, like, "Do I come in with an iron fist or do I come in with compassion?" And the truth is you don't have to go in with either. You just have to come in with, "Hey, here's the facts. I know you didn't mean to. Here's what we're going to do about it in the future. And here's what I need from this point forward." That clear communication, it still allows us to have high standards. We're not lowering the standard for the person by any means, and we're not treating them any different than anyone else. And so I think in a time where the good old boys club and the mean girls club is slowly like fading out,
Yeah, you're right. It is.
this is important for our new leaders in any industry just to be aware of is you can meet someone so human, even killed, gentle tone, and just explain everything, and you can't argue facts. Like if they pass the psych eval and they're in there and you can't argue with illogical people, but like
That's right.
there are some things that you can present on a silver platter and it'll be received just as that. Like there's just not going to be an argument. And I think that's where a lot of people get headstrong is they anticipate confrontation, so they go in a little too hard and then they're met with friction.
Or one of the other issues I found with me personally is so I did lead with my heart. I did have lots of compassion. I did know these people. They were, I always hate to say somebody's like family at a job because it kind of has gained this negative connotation like, run away, run away. I've got plenty of family and they're all screwed up. I don't want any more. But I think coming into this, one of the things that I actually hated the most was I was very fearful of conflict. I didn't like conflict. I would shy away from it. And what I learned rather quickly, being a leader can be, and at times, very conflictual, confrontational, a position that's filled with that type of thing where you have to have hard conversations. And it is, it took me a few months to learn that having a hard conversation with a level of compassion and honesty is the best form of compassion. You're showing that you care about that person. So I had to really learn to like chill out some of my nerves, calm down the what ifs, because our brains constantly go to the worst situation imaginable when we're in those situations that this person's going to blow up. This person's going to say this or try to hurt me like this. And it really took me sitting down and one of my favorite TikTok creators, he's a lawyer that started in his car, really a true success story because he gained instant popularity, now written a book. But his whole channel was based off of communication. And I sit there and watch this guy, and he is just expert level. And he just talks about all the things that he's learned. And I started to implement some of those and then wound up buying his book and his workbooks and things like that. And he just gives amazing insight on what the art of communication really looks like, how we can direct conversations, how we can change conflict into compassion, things like that, and the way we approach things. And I just loved it. So it took me really digging my heels in and going, I'm not going to be afraid of conflict anymore. But for a new leader, that is very difficult to come to the realization of like, this job is filled with hard conversations. And sometimes you have to deal with that.
Yeah. And when I won't say that I love conflict because I don't. It
Nobody
doesn't make
loves
me
it,
feel good.
but
But it is where the most growth actually
hmm
occurs.
hmm
I think when you have friction, that's where fires can get started in relationships, especially professional relationships. But confrontation actually allows you to break all of that friction down. It gets aired out. And if you have two rational people in the room that are working towards the same goal, you actually get to build a stronger foundation. And so I genuinely think sometimes that confrontation or that pushback, even if you're not bringing forward the frustration, you're bringing forward facts. The other person having those feelings and those emotions, totally valid. As long as it's expressed in a professional manner, we're going
Hmm.
to gain some momentum in a positive direction after that conversation. I also want to point out though too is like when leadership actually stops communicating, because it does happen. Sometimes they just don't know. Sometimes it's the weekend and there's no leadership that can actually give you an answer, and that feels like you're isolated on an island. People start to fill in the gaps, and it's
Hmm.
usually not positive. It leans into negative. And that's where your divide really starts to happen, your assumptions, your frustrations, your disconnect. I don't think communication is it isn't extra. It's your stabilizer. It's your stabilizer in your relationships, it's your stabilizer in your profession, it's your stabilizer in sports teams. Silence only creates stories.
Hmm.
And I don't know any good ones that have come from that. So I do think if you're walking into leadership, try your very best to communicate. You can't over communicate. It's just not possible.
Kimber, say that again. Silence creates.
I think silence creates stories, and they're rarely good ones.
I love that. I might actually steal that from you and start using that because
Please do.
there are many times when I have found in my own life that you're exactly right. Silence can be very convenient for some. Silence was convenient for me for a very long time. And it wasn't until I adopted the idea that compassion is really facing that head on. And it's strange. I married a woman who will meet conflict and negative talk and all the other negative scenarios that you can come up with. She's going to meet that head on with just the courage like I have never been able to have. And through much of learning from her, but also learning from a lot of my own mistakes, I have learned that her approach is probably better than most because the way she addresses it is compassionate, and it is one that does not necessarily allow for silence and sometimes does feel a little rugged at times. But once you get into the conversation, you realize, wow, this relationship that I have with this person, this work relationship that I have with this person, grew tremendously through this event that happened. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from what I've learned is like when you start to have that hard conversation and it feels like that knot's in your belly and your throat's trying to close up and you have the dry mouth and all the symptoms that come with that level of nervousness that came for me. After you get started talking, the words will begin to flow easier and easier the longer the conversation goes. And you start to see such tremendous growth in that relationship, sometimes in people that you're having to present these hard topics to. And I just love that. I love that through looking back, I can go, oh, yeah, now I see that this was really beneficial for me and that person. I don't think it's a one sided thing.
Well, and I think in our industry, people like to trauma bond a lot, which,
Hmm.
you know, it's hard not to. Our whole day is spent listening to trauma. And then if you're a dispatcher, you're voicing that trauma. If you're in the field, you're responding to that trauma. And so I can't remember what the statistic is. I'm sure it's adjusted a little bit, but there's something like, every person runs into one or two traumatic events in their life. Great. We deal with 1 to 2 dozen a day, if not more, depending on the size of your agency or depending on how many calls you go on. So, it's hard to sit here and say, like, we trauma bonded. No, we didn't. That's just the environment that we
That's
work
just,
in.
that's just a word. Yeah.
I've told people this before, and I don't know all of the scientific mumbo jumbo behind it, but I know you can't take a plant and put it in a room filled with negativity. And when I first started at my agency, I thought it was so funny. We had a really cool supervisor who was just trying to liven up the area and brought in some live plants. And by the end of the year, they were all dead. I mean, I'm talking about a dozen of them. Could have been
Yep.
because our windows were like tinted. I don't know. We're in Arizona. It's hot. But it made me laugh because I'm like, if a plant can't thrive in this environment, we actually have to be intentional about what we're doing to have a different outcome. So, like, again, I can't speak high. The center I worked for, I was so fortunate. We had themed weeks, we had puzzles, we had cards, like things that would entertain, but it would also bring the community on the floor together. So, potlucks were huge for a really long time. I was just very fortunate to be in that environment. And, before people start clapping back, like, oh, you shouldn't be doing those things on dispatch or, who has time for that? Everyone that I worked with never negated the job. Like, I think we were
Right.
one of the few
Yeah.
centers we didn't have a lockbox for our phone. Like, if you wanted to read, you absolutely could read. I remember, I think I was hired in, like, 2013, 2014, and I remember there being, like, a pamphlet that was like, "Hey, you can do all of these things except crochet because of arthritis." Like, we don't want to
Yeah.
bring that about by you being able to craft and do that. But I mean, there were people who just brought joy to the floor. And
You're right.
we were constantly combating it, but it wasn't in a bad way.
Very, very, very good stuff. And I love that you can't put a plant in a room full of negativity because this is something that I preach all the time. And I'm over a what we call a transfer center, but it's a comm center. We do interfacility, so we're constantly talking to different hospitals and doctors and nurses and things like that. It's something that I preach all the time, and I think that it really goes back to some of my spiritual beliefs and that really focus on the things that are pure and holy and good. But when you put, and I protect this with my life so many, many times, we have passed over very qualified applicants because the interview just shined that light of negativity on that person and showed us that they were negative. And I'm so protective of what we have, the atmosphere that we have now, that I'm not going to put that piece of negativity into the people that I have now because it spreads like wildfire. And if you keep a group of people that can relatively remain positive, that positivity will also spread. But you throw that negativity in there. And I used to do this when I was a youth minister many, many years ago. I would have my kids stand on a chair and have somebody on the ground. And I would tell them, pull that person up. And that's very difficult, obviously, to pull somebody of similar weight to you straight up from a rickety old chair is very hard. Then I would tell the person on the ground to pull them to the ground. That's much easier. That is much easier to pull someone off that chair. And
Absolutely.
that's a great picture of the positive negative battle that we face in the call centers, on the ambulances, fire trucks, police cars. When we get that piece of negativity in there, it can just ignite a whole department. So we really work hard to protect that from a leadership standpoint, protect what we have and protect that positive light that we try to shed on the world.
Well, and misery loves company, right?
Oh,
So
absolutely.
it's it is something that, you know, when I promoted, one of the things that I really loved is our supervisor's kiosk was in the center of the room. And it was
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of like
Hmm.
the eagle's nest. And
Yes.
so you got to see the culture of our floor. And we're no different than anyone else. We're a room full of humans. So there were highs and lows. But what was incredible to see is if someone worked heavy traffic or a difficult call, you got to see the culture of, as much as misery loves company, there is also something about people showing up for one another, showing up for their village. And that was probably one of the most privileged things that I got to eyewitness with a group of people who is just doing incredible work on ordinary days is they would stop what they're doing just to take a moment out for the human next to them, to check on them,
Hmm.
to pour into them, to lift them up. Yes, misery loves company. But I will tell you more often than not, because of this industry, I saw more people pick each other up than I did watch them slam each other down. I just did a session with a young lady, and, you know, we're talking about good things, but there's also things that happen on the floor, the rumor mill, and you catch wind of what someone may perceive you as or what they think you're doing right or wrong or the judgment, whatever the case is. And that was kind of her experience, and she was struggling with it. And it may or may not help someone else, but I always think, like, if someone's wasting their breath talking about me or taking time to make an assessment, there's two ways you can look at it. And the first is like, well, you're not talking to me, so it must not be that important,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
really like, I'm not dealing with that. I'm not even going to address it. And then we kind of step up on a soapbox and think that we're untouchable when we deal with that. The second way, which I really think is the best way, is to go and just approach the person and say, "Hey, I heard you didn't like the way that I handled that, and I just want your take on it and what you think would be better." Because the reality is just like I have that eagle's nest in the supervisor box,
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
have this view of me too. They're seeing other things that are happening while I'm in the thick of it. And so that assessment, that perception, that thought process, even if it's just feelings, it doesn't discount it. But I, as the leader, should be the one approaching them. I should be the one squashing out the drama and making it either fact or owning it. And if I own it, that person who, I hate to say disrespect, but that person who felt so comfortable talking about that
Mm-hmm.
openly with everyone but me, if I take ownership over it, there's a good chance that we'll call it confrontation, but that moment of conversation actually brings us together. No, we're
Mm-hmm.
not going to be best friends. They don't have to sit at my table and eat, but we are going to work collaboratively, cohesively, effectively, efficiently, because when you have respect, there's way more trust. And all we do is make decisions and actions that rely on our ability to trust that you know how to do your job. So I don't know if that'll help anyone else, but a lot of what you're saying, with the good comes some bad, but you can make that bad and turn it into a good outcome.
Absolutely. So I think I'm not going to call it an issue, but one of the things that we've seen throughout is that we as leaders get stuck on, and I'm guilty of this. I think we all at some point have been guilty of this. We get stuck that growth is about numbers. And I don't think that's accurate. I don't think that growth is about perfect staffing. I think that growth can be about individuals and where the maturity is happening at, where the relationships are being built at. Really, that sort of thing is important to me versus numbers. But I've definitely fallen into this gap of, oh, we're not perfectly staffed, we're all falling apart. And if this is our system, I feel like our system is broken. So how would you tell an individual provider to rewrite their own resilience so they don't break with that mentality of growth?
You know, I want to answer this in three different ways. And it's all different perceptions, right? Like for the frontline person, numbers do matter. For my person who's working the floor and can't get vacation, for the person who's been training
Sure.
people back to back. But you and I both know that not everyone is meant to do this job. Not everyone can
Mm,
answer that call.
mm,
Not everyone is capable of doing it day in and day out. Not everyone has a calling to this industry, and that is okay. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not more or less important than anyone else. They are valued in their own way. This just isn't the role for them, and that's okay. Um, and so for our frontline people, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. We want quality people. And there were seasons where we would get people who were aspiring to be something else in our department. 911 was just an entry. It was just a gateway into this industry. Maybe they were looking to be a police officer. Maybe the end goal was a homicide detective. Maybe it was SWAT. Maybe it was CSS. Maybe, so many maybes, right? Maybe they just wanted their foot in the
yeah.
door with the
Yeah.
city. But they would start in 911, and this is not their career, and good for them. Like, it took
Mhm.
me a long time
Mhm.
to realize that. And when I say a long time, when you ask me like, "Hey, Kimber, who are you? What do you do?" I would say I'm a mom and I'm a dispatcher. I'm not a dispatcher. That's what I do for a living. Like, that was part of my
Right.
identity.
Right.
And so unlearning that and reprogramming myself to really put my priorities in place, I value the role that I do. But what I really wanted to say is that I get to help people. I like helping people. I'm compassionate. I'm empathetic. I'm caring. I want to be part of something bigger. I want to contribute. That is a hard conversation to have with a frontline employee who cannot decipher those two things. So when you say, like, hey, we want quality, not quantity, they don't understand what you mean and why we as leaders are willing to take someone who's just willing to do the work for 3 years, because it is going to be quality good work for 3 years. They want to promote or advance or move forward in a different direction within this industry, but they're only willing to give us 3 years. So yes, we're going to have to train them for 9 months, but we get 2 years and 3 months out of them for that, which
Mhm.
is better
Mhm.
than the people that are falling off the wayside or can't pass critical or
Mhm.
whatever it may be in the very beginning. I know our rollover rate is high. I think changing that is challenging because I don't know about, well, let me ask you, where do you guys advertise your open positions?
So we advertise on LinkedIn and then our company site. That's pretty much the only place that our recruiting gets people from.
Cool. Here's what blows my mind. And like I'm saying this because I wasn't even part of this resolution or solution in any capacity with my agency or with my city. Why are we not going into high schools? Like, there's so many kids that are more than capable of doing this job. All they do is multitask. They listen to music, they can be scrolling on TikTok, they could be writing a paper, and then they're also doing coding on the side for like extra cash.
That's right.
They don't even know this job existed. I didn't know until police chief told me to
No.
apply. Nobody is advertising that this role is actually out there, and no
Mhm.
one's telling kids, and I'm using kids very loosely, or young adults like, hey, don't trip up when you're young
Sure.
because it actually can prevent you from having a really great career or a really great role while you're in the season of life.
Mhm.
I would say 60% of my education was done while I worked for my agency, which is incredible. My education was paid for by the organization that I worked for. Like, not many people are able to kind of like boast about that right now, but I also worked graves and I got to be with my kids. Like, there were so
Mhm.
many perks that no one was going to flag me down outside of those sources that we advertise on. So when we say like, "Hey, are we advertising our best?" We advertise our positions on like NeoGov. Okay, only if you're looking
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
this government job is that going
Right.
to pop up.
Right.
And LinkedIn is only if you're following one of those pages. Like,
That's
you have to
right.
look very specifically. And so it really does take kind of an outsider looking in for this, but word of mouth too. I refused for years to advertise on social media. I never did. I never advertised where I worked on social media. Mostly just the industry and the timing that I worked. Like, I
Yeah.
worked for a police entity and, police weren't exactly, we didn't have all the fans. And so
Yeah.
I never wanted someone to follow me home thinking that, I was an officer. I'm not sworn. I don't make any decisions. I don't have any of that. I just answer the calls and I want to send help. But I wasn't going to be that person that advertised we were hiring because I didn't want anyone to know where I worked. And so we have a couple double-edged swords when we're dealing with trying to raise those numbers. But we do have people that work for our centers that are social media influencers and happily would say it if it wasn't against our agency's protocol.
Right. Right.
So, like, we just run into a couple speed bumps with that, and I think over time, some of those bars will be lowered and accessibility will be higher. It's just going to take time. But we also wanna be selective. How many applicants do you actually want to sift through and interview and do critical? That's a
That's
lot.
true. That's true.
So I don't have an answer. I just have perspective on that. I'm more geared in on let's work on sustainability. Let's work on keeping you here and finding ways for you to fill your cup, find gratification, keep coping, keep showing up doing the same exceptional work that you did the day before. And
Right.
if not, how can we help? What can we get you?
Do you think we've lost sight of that?
I think sometimes we do. I think we go through seasons. You know, we I don't want to talk too much about my agency. I feel like I'm highlighting them a lot. They are incredible. We lost a couple of our personnel, not just in dispatch, due to some mental health stuff. And I think when situations like that happen, your resources become highlighted. They're very much readily available, advertised at a high velocity, and that's good. I don't know that any of the mental health that was associated with those instances were related to the job. Everyone has a life outside of work. We'll never know. It's not my part to judge and it's not my part to investigate. But I do think agencies across the nation are now understanding that, hey, hearing something tragic, do you remember the Vegas musical shooting?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I have never seen an outpouring to that level to a dispatch center, which was incredible. Like everyone and anyone across the nation was just offering support, compassion, empathy, mental health resources, nonprofits all over the nation are reaching out to them. And it was a huge event, but we also know that our industry crosses that several
Mhm.
times a day
Very much,
nationwide.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
I think sometimes we use the yellow highlighter and sometimes we use a pencil just to underline it. I think we're getting better. I like to think we're in forward motion, and the more that we talk about it, the more it becomes normalized.
That's insightful. I really that brings up just some thoughts, I guess. There's a lot I could unpack there, but you're right, that was an immense outpouring that I think showed us something, and I think you described that really well. I think that was a good description of kind of what occurred. That was one that, I remember you asked if I remember that event. That was an event that really struck me, I guess, deeper than any of the other national events. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because at the time I was really into country music. Maybe it was because there were people from my hometown that were at that concert. Could have been a number of things, but I think that was, and it's quite funny. I have the Dan Sun art book over here that he signed for me when we met him at conference, and he painted a picture of all the Las Vegas. It was the year after that happened, so he painted a portrait of all of the responders standing in front of their prospective response vehicles, and I keep it in my office. And I think that one just hit close to home, and I just remember hearing some of the tape from that and having such a deep heartache for the dispatchers that had to, because at the time I was a full-time dispatcher, and have to listen to that level of chaos that really was. I was like, man, that is very intense. So bring it. It's ironic that you bring that up, and that's over there looking at me essentially. So it just kind of makes me go back to that time and think about that. But yeah, you're exactly right. Uh, lot of emotions comes up from mentioning that event. I don't know why. I wasn't there. I didn't know anybody. I mean, I knew some folks from our hometown that had gone to the concert. They were fine. They got out. But maybe because it's maybe it's because we've yet to have any type of decent explanation as to how that all occurred and what happened. From time to time, I can certainly slip on my tinfoil hat and go down rabbit holes. Um, but yeah, that was an event that really put a big spotlight on dispatch because the news aired those calls for what felt like days after that. So,
Well, and I always go back and forth. There's there's ways to go about closure. And have been calls in my career and the duration of it where, you know, I don't want to know. Don't tell me. I don't want to know why something happened or how something happened. And the calls that I thought would impact me were not the ones that did. Like I actually handled those really well. It was I can move on to the next one. The call types that stung a little bit deeper, I think those are the ones that I really didn't appreciate when our peer team or when my coworkers would check in on me because it was almost like ripping off the scab again. Like, ah, I just went 24 hours without thinking about it. And now you're calling and you're checking on me. And of course, that now I have to think about it again. And so sometimes, like when things go national, and Vegas is an extreme, as you said, it was a national news, right? Everyone knew about it.
yeah.
But there are smaller circumstances that I often wonder, like when the news aired Kyle Plush's circumstance, or when the news airs a singular active shooter, like what's triggered for the victims and the victim's family? And who am I to feel entitled to that information states away? And so it like, I go back and forth between kinda like you, like, I would like to know, but, mm, what is
Maybe
me
not.
knowing going to do?
Yeah, maybe
And
not.
yeah, I'm not solving any cases. I might pretend I could. I won't. But, like,
Yeah, true.
my contribution is going to be minimal here. I still have a full-time job, you know? I
Yeah, yeah.
it's one of those things where I think often as a public we feel entitled to explanations and information, and we forget, like, what it could do to other people and how it impacts them. I mean, look at all the social media coverage on news cases or on court cases now. Like, people are running in and out of the court, and they're the victims. Or one thing is taken out of context, and now they're fighting that as opposed to getting justice. So
Yes.
bizarre.
Yes. I would tend to agree. Yeah, that's a tough one for me. I don't like that one very very
Sorry.
much. No, it's okay. It's totally fine. But as we start to wrap up, I really want to give you a minute beyond the titles and the business. Who is Kimber the human? What do you find that is that has kind of become your own internal alignment when this world can become so loud, especially for a dispatcher?
I think the biggest thing I've taken away, and I really do try and share, is that you can't always fix the system, not immediately. So just pump your brakes because you're just pulling all your effort out, expecting an overnight change, and it will not happen. Most likely not in this industry overnight.
You're exactly right.
But you can absolutely change how you move within it. And that is that ownership that I really try to work on with people because that's what rewriting resilience truly is. You know, it's not pretending things are fine. And I do not like that phrase when we would be in the queue and a major event is working. We had a couple coworkers that would just, their coping responses, it's fine, everything's fine, we're fine. And I'm like, no, we're not. For
Yeah.
this thing from fine.
The
I mean, it's
the
fine that we're not fine.
the I'm fine. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yep.
we're not fine. It's okay to say that we're not. It's really learning how to stay steady even when you're not fine. Like I can't control all of these things that are chaotic and nonstop and it's not for me. But I can sit here and say, this is what I can do. And when I'm at my capacity, there's control and there's capacity. When things are within my control, but out of my capacity, I need to be able to speak up and ask for help.
Hmm.
And so when things get to that point where, I have people saying, I'm fine, I'm fine. Hold on. What can I help you with?
Right.
Because we don't just announce that we're fine. I never in my entire adulthood have I ever had to announce that I'm fine just to cope. So
Yes.
that is a huge one. And you can care deeply and carry selectively. I think people forget that too. You can be committed without being consumed. And I hope that people can walk away with that because you don't have to identify as a call taker, as a dispatcher, as a police officer, as a firefighter, as an EMT. You don't have to. You can still care and do a great job and be you. And you can still have family life and you can still have boundaries and you can say no. And that's okay because this job, this role is not everything.
You're right.
At the end of the day, when you leave an agency, no matter how great or how not great you are, you can be replaced. Now, to the people, it is your personality that'll be missed. It is what you
Hmm.
contributed with joy, with love, with empathy. But at the end of the day, you can be replaced. So make that boundary so you can show up for the people who will be there after your career, the people that sit at your table, the people that want you at their games, that want you at the sidelines, that want you there for their graduations, that want you there for dinner at night. Those are things that I wish somebody just laid out and presented for me. And maybe they did, and I was just completely amiss. And
Right.
I didn't soak it up, but I so much look back at my career and I'm a single mom, 2 kids, they're 15 and 16 now, and the sacrifices I made to get us to where we are today, they weren't bad sacrifices, but every day that I picked up overtime to buy the house, I missed out on something with them. And now I look at these little mini humans and I'm like, "Ugh, I would give anything back
To
to
go
have you
back.
picking your nose." Can we go back to those days?
You can have mine. He's still there. He's 5,
Uh,
so he's still there.
it's the boogeyman.
I know. I know. It's aggravating. So, say you come across a dispatch lead or a supervisor that they know that their team is just drowning. Everything's falling apart. What would you say to them that should be their first strategic move?
Ugh, start communicating. Just start now. You don't have to do it perfectly, but you do need to do it consistently. What is your expectations? Lay them out clearly. Let them know what they're meeting and they're trying to attain. Your clarity reduces more tension than policy ever will. And I don't know about you, but our policies were abundant and changed and altered and adjusted. And we had ARS codes and bylaws and internal and city. And somehow,
Yes.
you know, we were a police entity, but we got all the updates for tasers and Glocks and like vests. And I'm like, never in a million years will I need this, but I need to read it. And so as a supervisor, highlight what's important and what it means to succeed and outline what that success is
Hmm.
for you. Don't just sit there and be like, well, you should know. Start communicating it. Check in with your
Right.
people
Right.
as humans, not just as performance. And talk about performance metrics. I think that's something we've talked a lot about, like culture changing. And we went from like the good old boys, the mean girls, and we're coming into this era of Simon Sinek's. We want to be good leaders. We want people to thrive long term in life, not just in the industry. And so when we say we're going to talk about metrics or we're going to keep metrics, we need to share that. We need to be transparent. What does it look like to
Absolutely.
succeed with these metrics? And what does it look like to fail? And what do you need to do? What can I coach you on? How am I helping you? Because, us telling you, like, hey, you're in the red. Well, that sucks. Do better. Okay. How? How do I do better when all of these changes are implemented and we got a new system and our system doesn't even register that until 30 seconds, but you're judging me on 20 seconds. They're going to have good conversations, but now you have to do something with them. So start communicating.
Perfect. I absolutely love that. I would also just piggyback off of that. And one of the things that I learned to do that has been super beneficial for us, if I'm delivering a bad metric that we haven't met, I'm going to make sure that there are good metrics scattered in there too, because not everyone is failing on every platform. There may be multiple places where you fail and you need improvement, but there are also places where your team shines. Look for those silver lining moments that you can encourage your team and say, you guys are doing a great job here. We monitor numerous metrics in our call center, and I absolutely love finding the really good ones or playing that really good recording that was handled exactly like it was supposed to go and everything fell into place the way it was. So I never want to inundate them with nothing but negativity because, as we talked about, that has the tendency to spread and misery loves company. So we don't want to portray that message. Well, Kimber, you have been an awesome guest. Tell us where we can find you at, where we can find all your stuff and get more of your message.
Oh man, resilience-rewritten.com is the training website. So you can sign up for a plethora of trainings. Staff can do it independently, agencies can do it. If an agency signs up their staff member for one of those trainings, you'll get a report card on the tail end. The employee will get
Well,
it as
that's
well,
cool.
but it does show like, hey, this person is struggling here. Here's what we talked about. Here's what's being implemented, as opposed to just being one-sided of like, we have trainings that are like, working with you is killing me. Okay, that's kind of vague. So let's actually clean that up and really find out where the wound is in all of that and what we're actually focusing on. There is social media, but I'm gonna be real honest with you. My social media started kind of on a fluke. I started recording myself. I've only ever talked on a phone as a dispatcher in person. And so it really started to critique myself. Like I started taking public speaking classes and I just wanted to see what I was doing, how I was talking. Do I sound like an idiot? And slowly there would be little pieces from sessions when I would work with someone where I'm like, oh, that's a cool little golden nugget. I'm actually going to share that. And so that's how TikTok came about. That's how Instagram and the Facebook was just, who doesn't love the Three Musketeers? So I did all three.
That's true.
But that's essentially like how all of that came to be. And so really it's just the website and it's only by word of mouth. It's not really advertised anywhere. There's a there's a LinkedIn, but it's not very popular. So I'm just underground. If somebody wants to improve themselves, great. If not, it's not the end of the world. There's other alternatives out there. And there's some centers that have really top tier internal mentoring
Hmm.
programs.
Hmm.
And I can't even speak to them because the output from those agencies are incredible. This isn't for everyone. And that is 100% okay. It's not a one size shoe fits all ordeal. And I knew that going into this. I wanted this to be for the person at the agency that's small, that's not able to attain trainings because of short staffing, budgetary restraints. A lot of the people that have taken my courses pay out of pocket, which is super cool and
Yeah,
very humbling.
absolutely.
But it also shows the desire for people to want to be better, to improve. If anyone is wanting some self improvement or to invest in themselves, do not ever think that you're stuck. You are not stagnant. You're just tired and
You're
you're
just
looking
tired.
for a way to grow. And those two things are not the same, being stuck and tired. And I hope that we have done a really good job at just in your and I's discussion that people understand that because the moment that we get steady, we actually make rational decisions on what to decide next. And so when we're burned out, when you're exhausted, like that's the whole core of our training at Resilience Rewritten is let's just get you to a place where you can think logically, clearly, be effective, be efficient, and whatever that looks like for you. It's not going to be the same. For you, it may be 5 deep breaths and you're good to go. For me, I may
Sure.
need to take a couple laps around the parking lot before I'm good to go. So I think it's just different. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
No, one of I love that message. I love what you're doing. I love your mission. I love that you're underground. I always say that this show has allowed me to kind of live my dreams. I've gotten some great responses from really huge creators that I've followed for a long time and have kind of, I don't like the word idolized, but kind of put on a pedestal in their respective fields. but I also have gotten to hear so many different takes on so many different things and learn so much. And I love, love, love my kind of underground guests where we have somebody that's got, a few thousand followers. They post a video every once in a while. Whatever their organization is kind of, to not wear out the term, but kind of underground and kind of a very niche kind of population. I always came into this saying that this podcast would never have this Joe Rogan type of following. That was never my goal for any of this. I didn't have these lofty goals. It was to provide a safe place to land to people within my niche, something that I knew about, dispatcher, paramedic, law enforcement, the brothers that we've worked around for so long. And then healthcare as well kind of got pushed in there too, because once I started researching, I was like, oh, these nurses are just as screwed up as we are. That's great. That's a whole new listener base. I love that. So for me, them being screwed up is wonderful. For them, not so much. But we're working to fight that and give them resources. But just to wrap up, because I could literally sit here and do this all day. This is probably my favorite place to sit in the world, is behind this camera and behind this mic and have good, deep conversations like we've had. So I thank you for being open and honest and really just showing a little bit of your heart. It really means a lot that you said yes and that you agreed to come on a show that 400 people every week listen to. And that's very small in the podcast world.
It's not small. It's reaching people. So thank you for having me. It's been a privilege.
Well, that's what I've always said. If you pack 400 people into an auditorium, that's a huge crowd. So I'm speaking to a huge crowd every time I talk.
Absolutely.
That's my way of not getting caught up in the numbers and the metrics and all those things, is to say that, hey, 100 people in an auditorium is huge. So, and if it helps one person, that's enough for me. But thank you again for joining us. You guys know I say this every week. You can find us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Angel's our social media manager. She does a fantastic job with all those platforms. I am really appreciative for her. She has increased my mental health by tenfold. Running social media 7 to 10 videos a week is time consuming and takes away from a lot. So I'm so thankful for her. I always say at the end of every show, because she's just a godsend. But go and find us at those places. Reward her for her hard work. Reward our team for all our hard work we put into kind of producing and doing all this. And we also have a website, asilentwarwithin.com. And as we say every week, be safe, take care of your mind, and we will talk soon. Bye, everybody.
You've been listening to A Silent War Within. If this episode resonated, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, you're not alone and your well-being matters. It's time to end this silent war.